In an era when justice was weighed in gold, Judge Zahran was renowned for an intellect that shook the very thrones of swindlers. Here is how he unraveled the most intricate of crimes with a single word. It is said that in ancient times there lived a judge named Zahran. He was renowned for his intelligence, shrewdness, and wisdom in restoring rights to their rightful owners and redressing injustices. His reputation was earned after successfully resolving 3 of the most difficult cases ever brought before him. The first case involved 2 neighbors. One was a kind-hearted man, while the other was cunning and deceitful. One day, the wicked neighbor fell upon hard times. His circumstances became dire, and he found nothing in his home to satisfy his hunger. He went to the good neighbor's house to ask for a loan, but only the neighbor's wife was there. As he was making his way to his neighbor's workplace, he encountered him returning home. He stopped him, explained his dire situation, and asked him to lend him 1,000 dirhams. The good neighbor did not hesitate. He pointed to a date palm nearby and promised to meet him there tomorrow with the money. The following day, the wicked neighbor reached the designated spot and found his neighbor waiting for him beside the date palm. The good neighbor handed over the 1,000 dirhams as promised. The wicked neighbor vowed to repay it 3 months later. The good neighbor agreed without requiring any written document or proof of the debt. 3 months later, the good neighbor went to reclaim his money. However, the wicked neighbor flatly denied ever having received it. The good neighbor was deeply saddened. He realized kindness was being repaid with evil, but then he remembered the wisdom of Judge Zahran. His keen intellect and shrewdness lay in his ability to curb injustice and restore rights to their rightful owners. Thus, a man went to him to lodge a complaint against his neighbor. When he stood before the judge and recounted the events that had transpired between him and his neighbor, Judge Zahran instructed one of his guards to summon the neighbor in question. Upon the arrival of the deceitful neighbor, Judge Zahran looked at him and said, "Your neighbor claims that he lent you 1,000 dirhams. Is your neighbor's claim true?" The deceitful neighbor vehemently denied what he had heard from the judge, declaring, "O judge, I have taken nothing from my neighbor, nor have I ever borrowed money from him in the past. His claim is nothing but lies and slander." At that moment, Judge Zahran turned to the honest neighbor and asked, "Do you have a witness to confirm that your neighbor took 1,000 dirhams from you, or a document to prove it?" The honest neighbor replied, "No, O judge. However, when I lent him the money, I trusted him completely. It never crossed my mind at the time that my neighbor would deny my right." Judge Zahran sensed the sincerity in the honest neighbor's words. He pondered for a moment, then looked at him and said, "If you are indeed truthful in your claim that you lent your neighbor 1,000 dirhams, then go and bring me a handful of soil from the very spot where you handed the money to your neighbor." The honest neighbor was perplexed by the judge's request, yet he complied with the instruction and hurried off to fetch a handful of soil from the exact location where he had lent his neighbor the 1,000 dirhams. Time passed, but the neighbor did not return. Turning to the good-natured neighbor, the judge then looked at the malicious neighbor and suddenly asked him, "Your neighbor has been gone for quite a long time. Do you know why he is delayed and has not yet returned?" Without a moment's hesitation, the malicious neighbor replied, "The place my neighbor went to is quite far away." At this, the judge laughed and said, "You have now proven to me the truth of your neighbor's claim that he did indeed lend you 1,000 dirhams." The malicious neighbor was terrified and asked, "How can that be, Your Honor?" The judge replied, "If your neighbor were lying and had lent you nothing, as you claim, you would not have known the specific place he went. For that very spot is the exact place where you received the money from your neighbor." Thus Judge Zahran vindicated the neighbor and ordered the malicious neighbor to be imprisoned until he repaid the money. The second case. It is said that an elderly man mounted his donkey and headed to the market to fetch a sack of flour. Upon reaching the market, he purchased a sack of flour. As the sack was quite heavy, a strong man assisted him. lifting the sack from the ground and hoisting it onto the donkey's back. The old man then mounted his donkey once more, with the sack of flour resting in front of him, and set off for home. On the return journey, the donkey stumbled, causing the sack of flour to tumble to the ground. The old man found himself unable to lift the sack of flour and hoist it back onto the donkey's back. While he was struggling to do so, a young man, strong in physique, yet boorish and insolent in character, passed by. He looked at the old man and asked, "What is keeping you standing here, old man?" The old man replied, "On my way home, my donkey stumbled, and the sack fell. Now I am unable to lift it back." The youth said, "I can certainly lift that sack for you, but what will you give me in return?" The old man replied, "Nothing." So the youth lifted the sack and placed it back on the donkey. He lifted the flour and placed it upon the donkey's back. The old man then mounted the donkey, seating himself behind the sack of flour. Just as he was about to depart, the young man asked, "Where are you off to, old man?" The man replied, "I'm going home, my son." The young man pressed him, "And what of the payment you promised me?" The old man answered, "I promised you nothing." The young man retorted rudely, "You're lying, old man." The old man said, "My son, I do not understand what you mean by such words." The young man explained, "When I lifted the sack of flour from the ground for you and asked what you would give me, you said, 'Nothing.' Now I want that nothing you promised me." The old man was astonished by the young man's words and sought to reason with him. He said, "When you asked me for payment, I had nothing on me to give you. That is why I told you, 'Nothing.'" The young man insisted, "That is of no concern to me. You must give me the nothing you promised." The old man stood there utterly bewildered and asked, "My son, how am I supposed to give you the nothing I promised?" The young man replied, "I told you, that is of no concern to me. I must receive exactly what you promised." Left with no other choice, the old man decided to go before Judge Zahran to have the matter adjudicated and to be rid of this man. The old man and the young man proceeded together to Judge Zahran. When they stood before him, Judge Zahran was struck by the absurdity. He looked at the old man and said, "Is it true, sir, that you promised this young man nothing in exchange for his help?" The old man replied, "Yes, Your Honor, that is exactly how it was." The judge turned to the young man. The judge asked, "And now you demand that very nothing which the old man promised you?" The young man affirmed, "Yes, Your Honor." At that moment, Judge Zahran realized that the young man was characterized by sheer pettiness. He pondered the matter for a moment. He ordered one of the guards to bring the donkey, with the sack of flour still upon its back, into the courtroom. The onlookers were astonished by this command, and no one could fathom what the judge intended to do next. The guard went and fetched the donkey, which was laden with the sack of flour, and brought it to a halt before the judge. At that moment, the judge looked at the young man with a challenging gaze and said to him, "Young man, if you wish to claim what the old man promised you, then lift the sack of flour off the donkey's back and set it upon the ground." The young man did exactly as the judge requested. He lifted the sack of flour from the donkey's back and placed it on the ground. Then the judge said to the young man, "Now lift the sack of flour from the ground and place it back onto the donkey's back." The young man complied once again, lifting the sack of flour from the ground and hoisting it onto the donkey's back. The judge then asked the young man, "What did you find beneath the sack of flour when you lifted it from the ground and placed it back onto the donkey's back?" The young man replied, "Nothing." At that, the judge laughed and said to the young man, "Then take it, for that is precisely what the old man promised you." In this manner, Judge Zahran succeeded in making the young man drink from the very same cup from which that poor old man had been made to drink. The third case. It is recounted that a certain man had 3 sons, all of whom bore the exact same name. Before his passing, their father drafted a will in which he stipulated, "Zaid shall inherit, Zaid shall inherit, but Zaid shall not." Shall inherit. When the sons read this will, they were astonished by its contents. They looked at one another in bewilderment, unable to fathom what their father had intended. The brothers kept asking themselves, "Who is this Zaid who is not to inherit?" For all three brothers bore the very same name, yet they realized that their father intended to disinherit one of them. Finding no other recourse, the brothers decided to seek out Judge Zahran to adjudicate their matter. When they stood before the judge and recounted their story, he asked, "Do you have the will with you?" "Yes, Your Honor," the brothers replied. They then produced the document and handed it to him. As Judge Zahran read the will, he was puzzled, thinking to himself, what could their father possibly have meant by this? He pondered the matter for a moment, eventually suspecting that one of the brothers might not be the man's biological son, though he wished to establish this fact conclusively. After deep reflection, the judge instructed his bailiff to escort the three brothers out of the courtroom, then bring them back in, one by one. The bailiff carried out the judge's orders, ushering the brothers into the chamber sequentially. When the first Zaid entered, the judge addressed him. "Zaid, the court has deliberated extensively on this case and has found but one solution. We must exhume your father's body to verify his fingerprints, as there is a possibility that this will is a forgery. Do you consent to this?" Zaid spoke with indignation. "No, Your Honor, I absolutely do not consent to this matter. I cannot bear to see my father, even in death, humiliated right before my eyes. No matter the cost, I desire nothing from this inheritance. I hereby renounce my share in it in favor of my brothers." The judge replied, "In that case, leave the courtroom now and wait outside." The judge then ordered that the second Zaid be brought into the courtroom. When the second Zaid entered, the judge looked at him and said, "Zaid, the court has deliberated extensively on this case. We have found no solution other than to exhume your father's body in order to verify his fingerprints, as there is a possibility that this will is a forgery. Do you consent to this?" The second Zaid, too, refused to agree to this proposal. He told the judge, "I seek nothing from this inheritance," and likewise expressed his wish to relinquish his share of the estate to his brothers. The judge said to him, "Then leave the courtroom now and wait outside." The judge then ordered that the third Zaid be brought into the courtroom. When the third Zaid entered, the judge looked at him and said, "Zaid, the court has deliberated extensively on this case. We have found no solution other than to exhume your father's body in order to verify his fingerprints, as there is a possibility that this will is a forgery. Do you consent to this?" At that moment, the third Zaid spoke up. "If it is absolutely necessary to exhume my father from his grave, then so be it. After all, the living take precedence over the dead." Upon hearing this, the judge realized that this Zaid was the one referred to in the will, and that he was, in fact, not one of the man's biological sons. For had this Zaid truly been his son, he would never have agreed to have his father exhumed from his grave merely for the sake of money. Thus, the judge was able to identify which of the brothers was not the man's true son. Thereafter, Judge Zahran became renowned among the jurists of his era. Everyone came to understand that a judge endowed with intelligence, shrewdness, and wisdom possesses the ability to distinguish between the oppressor and the oppressed, and that an unjust person can neither deceive a wise judge nor escape punishment. Finally, let us know in the comments, which of these cases did you find the most fascinating? In an ancient land where power often silenced the weak, one man stood as a beacon of truth, the wise judge. Before him came Zahran, a humble man whose life was being crushed by the greed of a wealthy and cruel oppressor. The oppressor claimed Zahran's land through deceit, standing tall in his ornate silks, mocking the poor man's plea for mercy. But the judge saw through the lies. With a penetrating gaze, he issued a decree rooted in reason that no gold could buy. Years passed, and though the judge eventually departed this world, the logic of his ruling remained an unbreakable shield for the innocent. This is how justice prevails when reason governs. The judge has passed away. Yet his shrewdness remains a lesson for every oppressor. Would you have found the solution had you been in Zahran's place? Share your thoughts.